A few moments ago, the choir beautifully chanted the canticle known as the Magnificat, also known as the Song of Mary. Although this text appears in our lectionary during Advent, it's traditional, practically mandatory, to sing it during services of evensong all year long. And that's how I fell in love with this text over the many years that I sang settings of it, including the howls, which you will hear later, as a chorister at one of my former parishes. This revolutionary speech given by Mary to Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, is called the Magnificat because of its first line in Latin, Magnificat anima mei Domine, or in the Elizabethan English, which I usually sang it in and which you will hear, my soul doth magnify the Lord, which is such a powerful image. Mary's soul magnifies, projects God's glory out, and makes it even bigger for all the world to see. The modernized version, proclaim the greatness of the Lord, seems a bit tame to me, but that's par for the course to tame back the words of prophets, make them safer. I hadn't been familiar with this text before joining that choir, so it stunned me to learn that such a radical vision of God's justice had been articulated by Mary, a teenaged girl, and further to learn that these words had held such a prominent role in church liturgy through the centuries. Even today, someone observing the hours of the divine office, such as a monastic, or those among you who are particularly devout, would ordinarily speak or sing this text at least once a day. Although I've never been that disciplined myself, the experience of singing these words dozens and dozens of times in rehearsals and services had a huge impact on me and was critical to my spiritual formation. Theologian Gail O'Day said, "In singing these songs, we continue to affirm to our world that this God is the determinative one. This God is faithful to the oppressed. No one who sings these songs can be resigned to the reign of evil." Mary speaks with the authority of a Hebrew prophet. And somewhat disappointingly, scholars, at least from what I could dig up, tend to talk only about Luke and what he was doing by including this text in his gospel, rather than Mary's prophetic role in speaking it. And so ironically, Luke, the man, who emphasized the importance of women to Jesus' ministry more than any other gospel writer, ends up getting all the credit. Mary is sentimentalized, tamed, made safer as a very unradical, even ideal woman and mother. In scholars' defense, it is much easier to give Luke credit as an author than Mary as a prophet, because it's just plain hard to believe that Mary, young, poor, presumably uneducated, could possibly have been responsible for this profound poetry. But by way of comparison, there's a story I'd say is even harder to believe, but has the benefit of being historically documented, of another teenaged girl who was about the same age as Mary when she became the commander of the army of an entire nation, Joan of Arc. She was about 16 when she led the French army in an astonishing series of victories that reversed the tide of the 100 Years' War with England and ultimately led to French victory. Joan has been a hero of mine ever since childhood, when one of my favorite books was about her. And parenthetically, I came across that book as an adult and realized how incredibly age inappropriate it was when I saw a picture of poor Joan being burned at the stake, hands tied behind her back, engulfed in flames. As I said, that was one of my favorite books. So maybe that gives you some insight into what I was like as a child. Like Mary, Joan spoke some prophetic words of her own against the mighty. In a letter from the year 1429, she addressed the invader of her homeland, "King of England, do right by the King of heaven. Hand over to the maiden," referring to herself, "the keys to all the towns which you have taken and violated, and firmly believe that the King of heaven will send greater force to the maiden than you would be able to bring against her and her good men at arms. And in the fighting, we shall see who has the better right, the God of heaven or you." Mary and Joan knew that no matter how much power you hold, it is best not to mess with the God of heaven, because that God is the determinative God, the mighty God, whose interest is not in mighty people, but in the lowly, in the hungry, in servants. The word Mary uses to describe herself, doules, traditionally translated handmaid, quite similar to Joan's term maiden, means servant. So Mary puts herself in the position of the lowest of the low, which is not something we tend to do these days. If anything, we do the opposite. We pump ourselves up and try to appear more important than we really are. But Mary knew that God lifts up and rewards not kings, not the mighty, not rich, not celebrities, but the lowly and the hungry. In our competitive striving for more and more for ourselves, Mary's song forces us to listen to the prophetic words of a teenager, a group of people we unfortunately rarely listen to. So hear now the words of a more recent teenaged prophet, 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, speaking to British Parliament 4 years ago about our climate crisis. "You don't listen to the science because you are only interested in solutions that will enable you to carry on like before, and those answers don't even exist anymore because you did not act in time. That future was sold so that a small number of people could make unimaginable amounts of money. It was stolen from us every time that you said that the sky was the limit and you only live once. You lied to us." For that, she was unsurprisingly attacked as being uneducated and unqualified, terms that could certainly apply to our other prophetesses, Mary and Joan. But I think we are resistant to listening to teenage prophets, not because they are uneducated, and trust me on this, I used to be a youth minister, but because they are passionate, sincere, unguarded, and unafraid to tell the truth, all of which makes them extremely dangerous to adults. If we really listened to the voices of our youth, we might have to live our lives a little less resigned to that reign of evil that O'Day mentioned, a resignation that we seem to wake up and renew daily as religiously as a monastic praying the Magnificat, or else forget about even the challenges of climate action. We would right now be able to take on Mary's 2,000-year-old prophecy and fill the hungry with good things. For we produce 50% more than we need to feed everyone on the planet. But in our resignation to the reign of evil, we lack the will to actually do it. And our brothers and sisters go hungry in the midst of abundance. If we had to live our lives as if all this stuff was real, what would we do? Would we listen to the prophets? Would we feed the hungry? Would we see the world through the eyes of our young people? This is truly dangerous stuff. Our economy can't operate like that. And so we come up with rationalizations, Things like saying, oh, these words don't come from Mary, the mother of God, but from the writer Luke, putting words into Mary's mouth. For a scholar, that is the safer route. But I don't have that burden. So I have no problem saying that Mary spoke, perhaps even sang these words to Jesus over and over, and that they were critical to his spiritual formation as they were to mine. Because if we look at Jesus' ministry, it's obvious that his mother's vision must have been foundational for him. And we get just one example of that in today's gospel, when he tells John's disciples that one of the proofs that the Messiah is come is that the poor have good news brought to them. Mary's song is good news for the poor. And it is God's will that we bring good news to the poor and that we fill the hungry with good things. But we don't have to rely on our own power to do these things any more than a teenage girl can lead an army under her own power, or another teenage girl can spout off poetry that will last for centuries, or another teenage girl finds strength to tell the truth to the mighty for her generation and unto every generation. It is power of God that makes these things happen. This determinative God who became flesh for our sakes, who died for our sakes, and unlike most who have power, invites us to his table to share in his power freely. May we do right by the King of Heaven. May we reject being resigned to the reign of evil. And this time of year more than any other, may we continue to sing with Mary, passionate, sincere, unguarded, and unafraid, that our souls magnify the Lord, making God's glory so big that all the world will see. Amen.